maybe message Elliot because I am presenting and I can't see the chat now. So the plan for the session, now that we've kind of got to meet who's in the room, is Elliot and I will share a little bit about kind of the relationships that we've built in Sacramento with legal organizations, and some stuff we've learned from doing that. And we'll make space too for other folks to share your experiences. It sounds like some of y'all are doing things that we aren't doing here, which personally I would love to learn more about, and I'm sure other people would too. But then also, like, a lot of people brought up in their introductions, like, there's a real question and tension around the extent to which tenants unions should be messing with legal service organizations at all, and like the extent to which that's really helping tenants versus kind of just like quashing the movement building momentum and work that we're doing. So we definitely also are going to make time to talk about that, but we're going to do that after we've run through the nuts and bolts of, like, if you're going to do this, what have we learned about good ways to do it. But so it's a little bit of a funny order, but just wanted to kind of preface that for folks so that yeah, y'all know that we are going to have time for that discussion. Okay, so Elliot, do you want to do this one?
Yeah, for sure. So Kitty and I were thinking about this, and we were thinking about like the different sort of tiers or the different sort of modes of engagement that we have with legal organizations. So we broke it down into 4 sort of levels. At the top, we have peer counseling. Obviously, that is sort of like, tenant counseling, peer-to-peer. So members of your union talking with tenants in need. Nonprofit legal services. These are like your local, like, city or county-wide organizations that offer sort of pro bono or very low-cost legal services. And you have some government-run legal services, some government-run legal aid programs. And finally, you have like private attorneys that run practices, and some of them specialize in tenant and landlord law. Obviously, there's probably a lot more landlord lawyers than there are tenant lawyers. So that's already a disadvantage that we're at. You want to click next there, Kitty? Okay, so the key difference between these is really like, follow the money, right? Ooh, this like network of funding behind all these organizations. So peer counseling is like, we here at the Sacramento Tenants Union and many others, I'm sure, have like tenant counseling programs. These are volunteer based, and it allows us to maintain our autonomy while offering some legal advice. However, we're not trained attorneys, so it's not like we can tell a tenant like how to file a case or like what defenses they should actually use in court, but we can give them sort of a lay of the land, as it were, in terms of, like, in California, I'm sure it's the same in other places, there's like new tenant law popping up all the time, right? One month this is the law, the next month the law is completely different and no one knows about it. And so we're constantly educating and and telling people about this. Nonprofit legal services here in our area and probably elsewhere, they're foundation funded, grant funded, and sometimes they can get some government funding as well on occasion. So you just have to be aware of that, like who pays the bills for this organization. That's going to color the way that they respond to tenants in crisis. Then you have government-run legal aid programs. These are government-funded, obviously. Here in Sacramento, we have like a tenant helpline that is funded by landlords and realtors. So you can imagine the quality of advice you get when you call the landlord-funded tenant helpline. So that has gotten a lot of people into some hot water, obviously. And then finally, private attorneys, it's your money. So they are accountable directly to you. However, it can be quite expensive, obviously. And so, for tenants who are already faced with increasing housing costs and other things, that's not always an option, right? And so you either have to like fundraise on their behalf or other things, and that just gets more and more complicated. So could you go to the next one, Kitty? So I want,
yeah.
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Go for it.
Well, I thought we'd just pause here and talk about like if we missed anything. Is there a different style of legal organization where you're at that we don't have here?
I mean, I'll just throw it. One that I heard people mention in y'all's intros is legal clinics that law students run from their universities, which is totally like we should have added that in for sure. I don't know if anybody wants to who has worked with a group like that wants to share a little bit more about kind of how those often are set up.
I can talk really quick about law students, maybe. In Ottawa,
Yeah.
we're working with a pretty cool professor. So there's definitely limits to what the law students can do. Like they can do a lot of legal research. They can like fact gather. They can do interviewing. They can maybe like sometimes they can answer tenants' questions, but definitely like if the struggles get to a point where you end up having to go to a landlord-tenant board, usually they can't do representation, and they are supervised by a lawyer. But it would be, I mean, depending on the situation, the lawyer might not have time to do the representation, or there's just like too many tenants to represent and they can't take all of that on themselves. I know we also tried to see if some of the students would be interested in getting involved with the organizing, and they're often not. I mean, some of them might be, but so like you definitely can use them for a specific purpose, I guess, but they're limited in what they can do or are willing to do, I think, because they're not necessarily doing, like, even for us, it's a class that's specifically targeted to access to justice. Even then, people are often taking that class to get more legal skills, and not necessarily because they have like any type of feeling of solidarity with the tenant. Mm-hmm. Or even they're doing it like in their mind, it's an act of charity, so it's definitely not a sense of solidarity. Anyways, that's our experience.
Thank you. That's great and very helpful. Does anyone else have other like experiences or reflections that they want to share on kind of ways that they've accessed some type of legal support? Okay, and yeah, we'll have like, no, successfully or unsuccessfully, if you've tried to get legal help and found that some avenue was like totally a dead end for you, I think that's valuable too.
We had a tenant who was in distress with their landlord and finally broke down and was just trying to take him to small claims court and ended up connected to an LDA. I guess it's a legal document advisor or something. And so we knew somebody in the community who was a former public advocacy lawyer who's now with the UFW, and she kind of gave us just a little bit of advice, but basically referred us back to the public advocacy firm that she used to work with. And when I called, it was basically just like, you know, who are you and why are you calling us? You know, we're not gonna give you any even generic advice. You gotta have the tenant call in themselves. It's gonna be means tested. You know, they gotta show us a tax return first. You know, in other words, they told us to go screw ourselves, basically. It was really frustrating. It's kind of like, what do you exist for if you're not gonna help?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, unfortunately, that's like, I think that's a common frustrating experience. Like there can be, if legal services serve specifically low-income clients, there can be a lot of requirements about them. The clients proving that they're low income, it can be hard for you as like sort of an ally to get access to like the phone calls and support the tenant. So yeah, those are great like kind of challenges to raise. So yeah, Elliot put in the chat that he's curious, and I'm also curious about solidarity attorneys, which Elliot, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think you're thinking of that as like, you know, regular private attorneys who are supportive of tenant struggles and want to just help tenants as a way to sort of give back. Has anyone has anyone successfully found these unicorns in the wild? Yeah, Catherine.
Yeah, well, it's kind of like through, the Eviction Defense Network. Elena Pop is the head of that. I'm not actually sure if she encourages all of her staff, but I think she does, and EDN works really close with Latu. So it's just like there's already that connection with this like more radical leaning legal services organization. Like they're a nonprofit, but like on their own time, they support us and come to our local meetings. So I think that, it comes from like an organization or a nonprofit legal org that is in support of tenant organizing. And we need more Aletta Pops. She's amazing. I don't know. I don't feel like she sleeps. She just has so much energy, and she's like 60. But I'm thinking of other cities, and it's hard. Like EDN is really established for decades, and but it's like creating those connections, and it is just like on their own time. So they're not working when they're helping us, so there aren't like those strings attached with the advice they're giving us.
Could you actually say a little bit more about that, Catherine? So are you saying that when they're there on their own time and not as a lawyer, they can more freely give advice that they would have to be really careful about when they were on the clock? Or how does that, like, what does that relationship look like?
Yeah, kind of. Like they'll always say, just like, this isn't legal advice, this is just like legal information, and kind of giving their opinion on what might work in terms of organizing. Like we were asking Elena about one of the people she was representing who's in our local, like, would it be helpful for us to support or do any actions before her court date? For that specifically, her opinion was like, it's pretty favorable for us, so it might not be best to rock the boat. But so like, depending on what she thinks is best, she'll be giving us that information. And I saw the question from Gail. Lena, she has trainings. So, oh my gosh, she does so much. She has trainings every Tuesday in the morning for organizers and caseworkers. So like to get us up to date on all the legal information. So like having that connection, so we know the law background so that we can help with the organizing better. And like one of her staff, as well as her brother who just graduated from law school, have been involved with Latu the past year. So they're in our local and are able to support us. So like outside of their job, so there's less restrictions. Gail, you have some socialist lawyers, but they still never participate in organizing. I feel like that's, I don't know, it is just like having those connections and trying to get like lawyers who are overworked to also give more time in addition to their job to organizing. But I wasn't there like when these connections were started, like in the past decade. So some of the older, I don't know if Waltz from Latu might have some more information on like how we got these connections started.
Great, thank you. Okay. So, so thanks all of y'all for like sort of sharing your experiences. I think that kind of peer sharing is really helpful. And we were just going to take a minute to kind of give a little bit more background on the ways that we've interfaced with lawyers and legal orgs in Sacramento. I don't know, Elliot, if you want to take that away.
Yeah, I could start. So like I was saying earlier, we run a peer tenant counseling program. So we have like a number you can call and an email inbox that you can send messages to. That's sort of like the first level of like, I wouldn't call it legal advice because we don't have any trained attorneys doing this work, but we've gone to many trainings through Tenants Together, and obviously Atune has hosted trainings as well. So our more experienced organizers that have a good base of knowledge in like what tenant law looks like, we engage in peer counseling with tenants. that could be enough. You know, sometimes we only hear from somebody one time. They say, hey, my landlord tried to, it says that they won't change my toilet that's broken. And we say, well, here's the relevant like civil code. Let us know what happens. And then that's the last time we ever hear of it. We also, if the case is really sticky, we will reach out to some of our, I wouldn't call them solidarity attorneys, because like we don't have that like official sort of relationship like Catherine was just talking about, but we do have attorneys that we work with regularly that we reach out to for like specific advice. Like I said earlier, the law is like constantly changing. We have city regulations, county regulations, we have multiple statewide regulations. And then on top of all that, you've got the CDC regulations and the moratorium that were just enacted. So we're always learning, and lawyers are always learning on the fly as well. So we're constantly like leaning on one another to gain more knowledge. And then finally, like if we've exhausted some of our options as organizers, we will refer out, but that's not typically our first option. But if, for example, I think Kitty might have an example that she's going to share, but like if a tenant lives in a single family home that's owned by like a small time landlord who's being a real a-hole, there's not a lot of organizing opportunity there. It's one person in one unit. There's not other tenants that are under this like umbrella that this landlord owns. So in that case, we may refer out to a legal service provider. I don't know if you wanted to share a specific story, Kitty.
Yeah, so I mean, like recently we got a call to our peer counseling hotline from a tenant who was a single mom with like 5 kids who hasn't been able to pay her rent during COVID because she usually collects like cans for the recycling deposit, but she can't because her kids are home from school. So anyway, and her landlord has been pretty unwilling to like accept the protections that she has as a person in California for not paying rent during COVID, and he's done all these like retaliatory things. And this person is like a survivor of domestic violence, and she lives in a duplex, and her landlord lives on the other side of the duplex. So you know, like Elliot said, like there's not much of an organizing opportunity. It's just this woman and her kids, right? And also because of her kind of history with DV, she was more uncomfortable with the idea of some type of like public demonstration and kind of drawing attention to herself in that way. And she had like a pretty strong legal case. She had like clear documentation that the landlord was retaliating against her for not paying rent when she was like legally protected from paying rent. And so in that case, like, yeah, there's a local nonprofit organization there's orgs like this throughout California. Ours is Northern California Legal Services. There's like also Central California. I haven't looked, but I would imagine there's Southern California Legal Services. So, and we know some of the lawyers at LISNIC. We've talked to those folks before. We understand how their intake process works. And so once we sort of realized like what was at stake for this woman, which was getting evicted with all her kids during a pandemic, and kind of like the ways in which her other options were limited, we ended up just explaining to her like how to do the intake process with LISNIC and get help that way, which she is able to do. So those are kind of like some of the factors that we don't have like a matrix or anything, like a decision matrix for like, if this is the case, do this. If that's the case, do this. But those are some of the like things that go into our thought process about like, when is it a good time to refer tenants to legal services and not. Oops. Oops. Sorry, I'm struggling to learn how to use these slides. Okay. So we wanted to take a minute to kind of just hear what all of y'all's thoughts are on this question of if you're fortunate enough to have access to, and people raise already a lot of reasons why you might want a counseling program because like lawyers are oversubscribed or something else, but if you have access to free legal services that you think are pretty good, why would you run a peer counseling program at all, or otherwise like try and yourselves help tenants with their housing struggles? What do folks think about that? Yeah, Kevin, go for it.
I mean, it's basically the thing we've been talking about is so that you can kind of keep things centered in the union rather than outsourcing to a law firm or a lawyer or anybody else is already going to be set up in their little organization, institution, firm, just an office. They're already going to have a little machine, even if it's a one person shop. But if you refer a tenant to them, like they could just get caught up in that, and you don't want them to think that, or that's just the first part of it. You don't want them to like think that you have to go outside the union for support, but also you want them to be involved in their own struggle primarily. You don't want them to have to refer to it, or actually, I guess you do want them to think of legal services as just an outside service. Not the thing you're going to solve your problem. You're solving your problem. The union is solving the problem, and you're just gonna go and buy a lawyer's services just like you go and buy bread. But that's not like the solution to the problem. The union is the solution to the problem. And so a counseling program in the union sort of centers things, keeps things centered in the union.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. And I'm just going to read out some comments that other folks typed into the chat too that I think are great. So Anthony says, we connected through eviction court support with a guy who calls himself, quote, the underdog lawyer, unquote, and heads a small law firm which primarily pursues class action lawsuits. He does actually get involved on the activist side and will even organize and fund non-arrestable direct actions related to his cases, which is legal for him to do, apparently. He's an invaluable co-conspirator, although we have to be careful around how we use him since he's a big self-promoter and the efforts he puts into cases can vary based on how glamorous and slam dunk they are. I don't know about y'all, but I feel that. Cece says relational organizing rather than just referring people over, we might want to grow them as core organizers themselves. Totally, yeah. Running a peer counseling network is a great opportunity for, even if people are initially calling just to get help, it's a huge organizing opportunity and relationship building opportunity. And then Jamie says definitely capacity, different values / priorities, discourages certain types of organizing, doesn't help with sustainability and solidarity. Yeah, totally agree with all of y'all. Anyone else want to jump in here? Megan says many lawyers are not allowed to give organizing advice, so people may not even think of that if they have no relationship with the tenants union. Totally. And Gail says that they feel like lawyers will sometimes overestimate how fair the legal system is. Yes, definitely a lawyer bias out there.
I think that some lawyers also have a lot of incentive to try to settle cases rather than fighting for the best possible result in some cases, just because of the ways in which the legal system works, the costs involved, the amount of time involved. So you have to really make sure that the lawyer you're hiring, if they do end up negotiating a settlement, which is actually what happens in most lawsuits, that they really will actually push to make it one that is as strong as possible for tenants.
Yes, that is a great point that we have totally observed too. It's like, yeah, there's a lot of pressure to settle. And it seems like, I think even when it's a nonprofit lawyer, it seems like, I think maybe just because their caseloads are so high, it's easier, like they can serve more people to some degree by settling than by taking every case to court. But like you said, that's not necessarily like the best outcome for tenants, especially if it's a pretty modest settlement. Yeah, so basically y'all have all the same ideas as we do about why we should do this. So like Cece said, running a counseling program is a huge organizing opportunity. Another experience that we've had, at least that I would guess is the case elsewhere too, is a lot of legal aid organizations will turn people away until they absolutely need a lawyer. So for example, at least here in California, like if somebody has a moderate habitability problem, like I don't know, like they don't have hot water in their kitchen sink or something, like that's pretty crappy as a tenant and for sure something that their landlord needs to fix. But most legal aid organizations are going to be like, yeah, we can't help you with that. Like we're too busy with other things, right? And really, like pretty much the only time that someone can go to a legal aid organization here and get help is when they've already had an eviction filed against them and they need a lawyer to help them file the response that they need to file with the court. So, you know, like those places are often catching tenants pretty late, I think, just because they're so capacity limited. Also, you know, if you're running a counseling program and you've got a phone number or something, like that's one more thing floating around the internet or on flyers or something that people might see and be able to get help at all, right? Like, I mean, not everyone's going to know about legal services, not everyone's going to know about your counseling program, and the people who know about those things aren't going to overlap. So potentially, like, you're just getting in touch with more people who need help. And then, yeah, one other thing, and this kind of, I think I'm sorry, I forgot your name, but somebody from Mississippi was talking about this, is one thing that we find we're able to do as tenant counselors that is pretty handy in terms of working effectively with the legal aid options that we have because they're so capacity limited is if we're talking to a tenant first, we can spend a lot more time with them, like explaining to them how the eviction process works or whatever, and helping them kind of like refine their story in the sequence of events that happen to them so that when they do call like a legal service organization and ask for help, they know what to say and they know how to explain their story in a way where the lawyer is going to be like, oh yeah, that's something that you need a lawyer for and that we can help you with. Okay, sorry, I'm just taking a quick peek at the chat here too. Yeah, a lot of continuing good discussion about like organizing and settlements and the relationship with lawyers. Okay. Elliot, you want to run us through things to be aware of?
Yeah, let's do it. So as we've all sort of already mentioned, there are some sort of pitfalls or some things that you should think about before working with legal organizations. First of all, you need to think about the quality of the legal services being provided. Here in Sacramento, like I said, there's a tenant helpline that's funded by landlords. So you can imagine the quality isn't that great. There's also a tenant protection program that's funded by the city. We have direct evidence that the advice given by this program is often wrong. So tenants will contact us and say, I just talked to the tenant protection program people and they said X, Y, Z. And we go, no, that's not right at all. So it's important to like get advice and to listen to tenants who tell their stories about like having used these services before so that you can kind of like eliminate some of them. I was personally kind of like happy when the city instituted this program because there are so few legal service options in Sacramento for tenants. But after hearing from several people, I'm not that stoked on that program anymore. So just be aware of those things. Also, lawyers, like everyone else, are human beings and they make mistakes. They have their own biases and they have their own perspectives on the way things are supposed to work. People were talking in the chat earlier about, you know, why would you become a lawyer if you didn't believe in the legal system? So there's already a bias inherent in that legal system that a lawyer is sort of like supporting sometimes by participating in it. So just be aware of that. Avoid flaky outfits. So there are, I think it was Anthony was talking about this like underdog lawyer who is a big self-promoter. There are legal organizations out there that will advertise certain services or like the capability to do certain things. And when you reach out to them in a moment of crisis, they are nowhere to be found. So don't allow yourself to get burned like that. Keep a special roster of the trustworthy ones and the untrustworthy ones. Because like I said, you don't want to be in the 11th hour defending somebody against like an eviction notice or like an order from the sheriff's department to vacate. And you're like, oh, they don't answer their phone. Or, you know, you get the voicemail that says, we'll try to call you back within 5 business days. Like, oh shit, that's not good enough. So be aware of those kind of things. And also, people have already brought this up, I think, in the chat and elsewhere. Legal orgs often have a tendency to want to settle. This is for many reasons. It's I think it's out of necessity or out of just the sheer number of cases that they have to take on. If they took every single one of their cases to like a full jury trial and chased it all the way up to the California Supreme Court, they'd serve like 4 clients a year. So because of the massive caseload that they have, they often will pressure tenants to settle. This may be a way to protect a tenant, but it also may not be what's in the tenant's best interest. Meaning, if you do not do the counseling portion, if you do not go through like some organizing and some basic, like leadership sort of training, and you just immediately refer out, the tenant will settle, which may, keep them from losing their housing, for example. But in the long term, it's not going to be good for the tenant. And somebody also mentioned that there are often non-disclosure agreements involved in these settlements. So not only does the tenant not get the outcome that they desire, but they are no longer allowed to like agitate and organize in that instance. Now they're like sealed off from pursuing it further, which is a big leg up for a landlord, right? It's basically like, oh, another settlement, they're not allowed to touch me anymore, move on to the next tenant who I'm going to harass and try and mess with.
Yeah.
That's it. Thank you.
Anyone have other pitfalls they want to throw on there? And I will just lift up to, Gail said in the chat, like some lawyers realize that they're doing harm reduction and they try and use the legal system as best they can to protect tenants. Like, we definitely agree with that and have seen that here. And in particular, I'm thinking of one of the lawyers that we work with at Lisnick. Like, she's like come to organizing meetings in her off time just to help us out, or she'll like kind of, I think she sort of gets the inside-outside game that you can potentially play as a tenants union and a legal services organization. So like, these people are totally out there. It's just a matter of finding them and making sure to kind of do your due diligence and vet them before you're confidently sending tenants that need help to them. Kevin, you're on the stack.
My question is about, like in our area, if we just literally can't find any good lawyers and you're forced to use a flaky lawyer, are there any measures that you can use to try to kind of control them a little bit and make them honor some agreement or contract you have with them, make them more responsive, anything like that?
That's a great question. Does anyone have a good answer to it? I'm not sure that I do. Or just thoughts about what you would do if you were kind of in that position, or if you are in that position like Kevin is. Sorry.
I have maybe some thoughts.
Yeah.
Or some ideas, because we are kind of in that position in Ottawa. Like, there is one really cool rad socialist lawyer, kind of, but he's very busy, so he can't really take on any cases. So we have someone who, so we have another lawyer who, while he's a new lawyer, he does seem to have practiced a lot in landlord-tenant law, sometimes defending the landlord. So definitely not ideal, but he's willing to do like almost everything for free, and like it's possible that we'll have to go all the way to the landlord tenant board, so it could be a really long fight. I guess like a couple things that are helpful is that I guess lawyers have this like code of conduct where they need to like zealously represent their clients. So while that can backfire sometimes, it can work in this case, like it can work in our advantage in that like they really have to listen to the tenant. What was I gonna say? I think we were like we tried to be very clear that like we were still going to do organizing, and that was our prerogative. What was I going to say? Yeah, we were also like very clear about how some of the tenants are part of like marginalized groups. So we wanted to like make sure that he kind of understood those power dynamics, and he seemed to understand it, so that was good. what else was I going to say? And then just like we continue to do peer-to-peer counseling. So in my humble opinion, he's a little overconfident about the results of Tenants. He seems to think it's like a slam dunk case, and I'm not sure it is personally. And the other thing too is that like I feel like he doesn't realize that, well, let's say like we have a 90% chance of winning. If we get a bad judge and like that 10% chance still happens, like he'll be fine. The tenants will have to be kicked out of their homes in a week, and like the reason they're not out right now, sorry, this is a rent eviction case. The reason they're not out right now is because a lot of them can't find places. So they're not going to be able to find places within a week. So like you have to be like, you have to really understand that like going to the landlord tenant board is not these tenants' ideal situation. They would much rather negotiate with the landlord. We decided that since he was overconfident, maybe that could be good in the negotiations, because he could be like, you know, we have a great case, like, and really put pressure on the landlord. But yeah, I think like we are still trying to like make sure that tenants are adequately aware of like the risks, I guess, and not being given like false hopes. And I think the tenants are already more skeptical of the legal system than the lawyer, which is unsurprising. So we haven't had to do like too much work with risk management, but yeah, just like managing that in our minds and knowing that like trying to negotiate with the landlord is a better outcome than going to the landlord tenant board. Yeah. So,
yeah, that's a good point. Like we had said earlier that we had sort of represented legal org's inclination to settle as a bad thing for tenants, but you're right that in some cases that's like the least risky outcome, to guarantee a situation where the tenant isn't forced from their home with nowhere to go, and that may be what they want to. Totally.
Right. Yeah. Sorry. I know settlement often isn't great, but in this case, the laws are very like, I think the wins would potentially be procedural, so that it would extend, like the slam dunk case we have is essentially procedural, I think. Sorry if I'm getting really into the weeds of it, but so it might be like a win temporarily, but it wouldn't necessarily be a long-term solution, because the landlord just come back, like fix the procedural issues and still legally renovate tenants. So anyways, that's why we think settling like and meeting some of the demands of the tenants, and basically trying to use like our legal power, our PR power, people power, you know, all these things to try and get the landlord to do a settlement that's good for tenants is what we're trying to do at the moment. But anyways, yeah, sorry.
No, that's great. Thank you. It looks like we've got Carolyn and then Hike on stack. Carolyn, go for it.
Yeah, so I guess, so I mean, thank you for that, for both of those responses to Kevin's question. And I guess so, similar to Kevin's question, so like something that we're running into is, so like we're in the process of setting up a peer counseling hotline, which is like everything that's been said here so far is really encouraging to what we're working on. But one of our biggest concerns is that even though we're in a place right now where we're really strong on like getting out like know your rights information, we're very clear on what the laws are and the protections people have. The big kind of like looming thing is that just like a lot of the time it doesn't matter, and landlords are just like really quick to retaliate really dramatically and violently, and even though we know the protections people have, we're nervous about like if someone was in a position where a landlord retaliated really suddenly and violently against them, we wouldn't want that person to be undefended, because you can only tell somebody so many times like these are your rights, but like if there's no one that can actually like defend that person in a time sensitive way, I think that's I don't know, a fear we have. So I'm wondering if anyone has anyone who has been working in peer counseling hotlines like has any advice on that, of like in addition to, you know your rights info and like kind of team sourced information, like how do you build in a panic button to that? Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a great question. I'm gonna go to Hike because he's on Stack, but if people have, feel free to jump on the Stack, especially if you have thoughts about what Caroline just posed to the group. Hike, go for it.
Yeah, that's definitely more space for discussion. A couple of things I wanted to mention. One, to Kevin's point, I think would be interesting to actually consider having Atun involve some sort of a mechanism to maybe connect together on state level, perhaps because of state laws, student lawyers. I personally have little experience with like actually kind of knowing, but I'm sure others might have, have more experience, and then be able to, on statewide level, connect student lawyers or practicing lawyers to areas like where Kevin is at, that have the need but do not necessarily have sort of like any kind of organizations there. To the part that I wanted to say to the be aware component, and here I am starting off by actually saying that, hey, the support is there's place. I definitely agree that there's place, for lawyers to give some level of support. Perhaps we in LA area and other major metropolitan areas are a little spoiled because we actually have organizations like this, and so we get to think about like what is a separation point as opposed to like like we need to have at least someone. I would say this, to further the point of lawyers are not organizers. I feel it's very important whenever you're inviting a lawyer to a tenants organizing meeting, to be aware of how they are in that meeting. A couple of moments would be discussing with the lawyer who is going to be coming, if they're going to be at all coming to organizing meeting anyway, that the tenant leaders, facilitators reserve the right to interject and clarify any question that is directed to a lawyer but is better answered through organizing, and for the lawyer to be okay with it, for the lawyer to be very clear on the limitation of time and space that they occupy in organizing space. I thoroughly believe that there is no lawyer in their capacity as a lawyer that can ever be an organizer. That is not to say that individuals, like Gail said, who happen to be lawyers, can't be organizers while they're not lawyers. And so to me, the best lawyer is the one that understands that they're not an organizer and they're only a supporter. In secondary position.
Great, thank you. We've got Catherine on Stack. Oops.
Hey, yeah, I just want to quickly also, I don't know, if I talk about the right to counsel, like push for right to counsel, so that all tenants facing eviction can have access to a lawyer. Like that is a campaign in Los Angeles, but it's so long. I think it's been like more than 2 years they've been organizing for that. We have a smaller eviction defense program now to connect tenants with lawyers in the eviction process. I know San Francisco has right to counsel, and so does New York. So maybe for the future, might want to hear from them and like how it's changed in the past few years that they've had right to counsel. I could see how that might change the landscape of organizing. Like if there is this, like what everybody has been saying, there are lawyers who may not have the best advice that might result in the best outcome without the organizing component, or having like that long-term sustainable knowledge of tenants to fight for their rights, like might just face the same issues again down the line. Just wanted to bring up right to counsel and maybe to talk about that more with SF or other spaces that actually have that.
Yeah, if anyone is from a city with right to counsel and wants to share their experience, that would be awesome. I think Philadelphia also has it, so maybe, and the Philadelphia Tenants Union is active in 18, so we could at least find them and ask them later. Oh, Gail, you're on Stack, go for it.
Yeah, sorry for talking so much. I just had a question because I have found that tenants often like feel like if they don't have legal power, they don't have any power, and
Mm-hmm.
so and they just want to hear from a lawyer like so badly. Like
Mm-hmm.
you can have so much experience as an organizer. I mean, I actually don't, but other people in our organizing do have a lot of experience with tenant organizing. But they just want to hear from lawyers. And so like I think that kind of scares me sometimes because I'm like, well, if the lawyer ends up telling you that like the organizing is a bad idea because I don't know, you might get some defamation or whatever, the tenants might just be like, all right, well, no more of that, and it could really undermine the organizing. And yeah, I don't know. On the one hand, they are very skeptical of the legal process, but on the other hand, that's the only true power they see themselves having. So I'm just wondering like how other people kind of handle that and try to give people like hope in the organizing itself.
Yeah, that's a great question. And maybe kind of ties into what Caroline was asking actually about like, you know, when the laws are insufficient or when you don't have confidence that they'll be enforced, what do you do and how do you get people to believe that it's possible? Kevin, I see that you're on stack.
And I don't want to take up too much time. I want you to be able to get through the whole presentation here. But that was kind of something that was popping into my head in our last discussion. I think it was the regional one, where, I mean, the whole project of this is getting people to think about, you know, their participation in the society in a different way. You know, housing as a human right, housing as part of their democratic rights, not something that is sort of a separate part of their existence. And so like getting people involved in decision making and taking up the power they do have rather than deferring it to lawyers or political representatives. And so like I want to just have like tenant rights sort of sessions set up just to show the tenants like, see, you don't have any rights. This lawyer is telling you to like give up and move, or they're telling you to settle or whatever. And it's like, this is why we have to join, like we have to form the union and get strong and like act on our own. It's like, is there a way to maybe prepare tenants before you have the tenants' rights clinic or something? Or like in the Law 2 workshop where the first meeting you have of your incipient union, where you maybe just have 2 people or 3 people or 5 people, you have a lawyer there, but they're kind of sitting in the corner with a dunce cap on, and like every now and then you just kind of like ask them a question, and it's like, well, what does the law say about that? And then it's like, you know, you let them say what they say and then like shut them up. It's like, okay, now we're going to get back to our actual organizing. We're just going to use you as a reference book so we don't have to paw through the legal library ourselves.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, it's funny that you bring up the know your rights thing because Elliot and I actually kind of used that strategy. In our tenants union, we launched this connected but separate eviction defense network, not to be confused with the one in LA. That's like a rapid response thing, or we hope it will be like what Lawsuit is. And we use that exact tactic. Like, we had a Zoom meeting to get people prepared. And the first part of it was actually like talking about tenants' rights and protections as it relates to getting evicted as a tool to illustrate like they're wildly inadequate and the only option is collective action. So yeah, I totally agree with that. Elliot, you're on stack.
Well, Kevin actually kind of got to exactly what I wanted to discuss, and that was like, I wanted to ask if there are organizations on here right now that work very closely, say with like an initial tenant meeting, that are there organizations that work very closely with an attorney in that circumstance, and others that avoid an attorney in that circumstance, and like what are your reasons for that? Like Kevin was talking about, like if you have an attorney present, you want to keep them off to the side and use them as a reference source. What is the reasoning for that, and are there others that feel differently?
That's a good question. I know at one point, particularly when we were working with like immigrant communities that, with people who don't speak very good English, elderly people, in one rent strike in particular that we were organizing where, the presence of lawyers was important. A lot of the tenants got confused between the lawyers and the union, and would sort of think that like they were the same thing or that one worked for the other. And so I think that that is something that like we kind of learned that we had to do a much better job of clarifying, and keeping lawyers relatively off to the side is one good way to do that.
Yeah, totally. And I've observed at least that to some extent that's almost like a personality thing, and some lawyers are good at that, and some lawyers have a hard time with that. Um, I did want to share one thought going back. Oh, sorry, I'm bad at switching these slides. Going back to Caroline's question about, yeah, like how do you have a panic button, or how do you kind of like, because yeah, the reality is like the law is inadequate, illegal lockouts happen all the time. Either like landlords threaten their tenants with violence. I mean, it can get pretty crazy, and it does get pretty crazy. And one thing that we have kind of had to think about a lot as we tried to launch this eviction defense network, having limited experience doing eviction blockades or anything like that, is like kind of reckon with the possibility that we're going to fail some people, or need to like not be able to take cases with when people are really struggling if we're not confident that we can help them, which is a hard pill to swallow, but I think sometimes you got to do it. And I've been thinking a lot about kind of like the need to stress test some of your plans in the lowest risk settings you can. And so one thing I'm thinking about there is like, I don't know, like if you're an undocumented single mom of a bunch of kids, like it's going to be the risk of doing a risky action with the potential for a higher reward is way bigger than if you're like, I don't know, like a young couple who could easily like stay with friends for a couple of weeks if they unexpectedly had to leave their housing. So I think one thing to potentially think about is like as a group, as a union or a group wanting to do actions, is like, like could you kind of almost plan like a bit of an action, like, okay, we've got these people that are willing to like go big and fight their landlord, recognizing that they could fail and they could get evicted, and like, we've got somebody else that has a room they can crash in for a couple of weeks until they find somewhere else to rent, and kind of like almost plan those actions with like a bit of a contingency plan before you feel ready to take on like even more difficult cases. And I don't know, that's something that I've been considering lately in terms of like the panic button stuff, and like how do you kind of like protect tenants as best you can. Um, okay, so the last kind of, and we've kind of already been talking about this, but the last thing that we wanted to make sure that we had time for was, just like getting at this question that a lot of folks raised at the beginning, which is like how to navigate the tension between building collective power and developing autonomous tenants unions and associations, et cetera, and trying to maximize the likelihood of good outcomes for tenants. And like a lot of folks have brought up like, oftentimes like the best action is also a riskier action, and how do you kind of make that decision about risk, or how do you help a tenant make that decision for themselves? And yeah, so we just wanted to kind of open it up again and see like, where do people's personal thoughts on that? Has your union talked about it? What have you come up with as a union? Do you have, what have kind of your experiences been with this? Oops. don't all share at once. Yeah, hi, go for it.
Yeah, I guess I can start by saying that I think of this as two separate things because one part is when a tenant is in crisis, as like what we practice, what Latu practices, I know is to, and probably a whole lot of us, is that to center what the tenant is comfortable with, and we'll have spoken to this already a little bit, and only take actions that the tenant is comfortable with. But thankfully, our power building and developing our autonomous unions is not hinged only on actions that are around tenants in crisis. And I think, being very clear that in times when there isn't an imminent crisis and imminent displacement coming, we do focus specifically on collective power building that is not looking for support and help from organizations that are not doing that.
Hi, could you share an example of the type of stuff that you do to kind of build momentum and capacity when people aren't in crisis?
Sure, and I mean, there's lots that I would love for us to be learning to do in Glendale that we haven't. But one of the sort of like very straightforward things that we do that has become a practice are what we call neighborhood walks, and we just walk the neighborhoods with a bullhorn and flyers about the next meeting. And we kind of got a little scared for a second with the pandemic that we'd have to modify it, but lo and behold, it's still absolutely possible to be on the sidewalk with a bullhorn, and then a person comes out and we're still whatever 6 feet apart and talking. And so having regular neighborhood walks has been one very particular thing. One thing that we struggle with, and I see improving, is once the person is in the union, has attended their first meeting, connecting people to specific roles within the union. And, I strongly believe that's a very important piece to collective power building, but lots to improve on in Glendale. But yeah, neighborhood walks is one that we do all the time.
Cool, that's awesome. Thank you. Anybody else have thoughts on oh yeah, Elliot, go for it.
I just wanted to share that one thing that I think is very important for me is to have like a good base of knowledge to work off of when you're making these sort of decisions alongside tenants. Part of that is just like experience. It's going through tenant counseling and organizing for a period of time, but also like I try to do as many trainings as I can, even if I think I've already seen this training 5 times. It's like in California we have AB 1482 and AB 3088. These are 2 statewide laws that sort of regulate to a certain extent what landlords are allowed to do and not do. I try to take as many of these trainings as I can and listen to experts on these things so that when a tenant does come to us, we can, part of navigating that tension is like you want the best outcome for the tenant, but sometimes that requires a little bit of like nudging, because I think like Gail was saying earlier, we all grow up watching like Law and Order and shit on TV, right? Like the heroes on primetime television are lawyers. And so everything in society we feel should be dealt with in a courtroom. That's how it works, God damn it. If somebody is doing something wrong, you get a lawyer and you go to court. And so that's what folks think is the way the system works, right? And they don't have any other context. So part of being able to agitate and sort of like nudge people towards the organizing mode is knowing the limitations of the law. Kitty mentioned this earlier. One of the best organizing tools we've had is to do like a know your right style training where you kind of, it's like an M. Night Shyamalan kind of like twist at the end where it's like, let's all sit down and learn our rights. And people are like, cool, I didn't know that. Oh, landlord's not allowed to do that. Oh, there's a law to protect us from that. And then at the end, it's like, what does this actually mean? It means that other than these 8 things, your landlord can do whatever they want, and it's all legal. And it's like, oh shit, that's totally true. And so then that's how you kind of like, that's how you navigate that tension. So some people are going to say, you know what, it's not risk, I'm not risking it. I'm not going to like knock on my neighbor's doors. I'm not going to be out on the street corner picketing anybody. I want to talk to an attorney. And you say, okay, then we can refer you off to folks that we have a relationship with. Others are going to say, that's bullshit. Like, so you're telling me there's not much we can really do here unless we get together and collectively organize you. And those are the folks that you can like build into like a more core like leadership style tenant association for a building or a neighborhood or whatever. But for me, it comes from a place of like knowing the limitations of the law. That's a good organizing tool for me.
Yeah. So there's some discussion in the chat that I think also ties back to something we were kind of talking about earlier, which is like, yeah, a lot of tenants really want to talk to lawyers and put a lot of faith in lawyers and not a lot of faith in their ability to organize. And then Kevin, I think what you're suggesting too is even people who are part of tenants unions are sometimes unconfident that their ability to do like a direct response is going to be sufficient. So I'm curious if people have, and Anthony, I see you've responded. I'm curious if people think about that, like how do we kind of generate the confidence for ourselves and for other tenants that we encounter that like it's possible to win through direct action, especially if you're in a place that doesn't have a history of like militant tenant organizing. Yeah, Catherine.
I don't have a fully formed thought, but yeah, like we in our East Hollywood local starting to share more of our successes during our meetings to remind everyone that we can see successes with doing these direct actions. Specifically, we've had successes after going to landlords' homes and shaming them in front of their neighbors and seeing like good, quick results. So yeah, like sharing those success stories and like showing that we do have that collective power. And yeah, some of our like new members are from those from those escalations, and they've seen that it worked and now are part of the organizing effort. I want to mention too, like, yeah, talking about membership and keeping people in the union, super difficult. Our East Hollywood local is splitting like subcommittees because we were like real disorganized before, kind of just like everyone doing whatever, very last minute, but trying to have subcommittees like our outreach, media, membership, conflict resolution, and like our membership is going to be really important, and that's reaching out to new members, yeah, like giving them roles and training them, and kind of like maybe like shadowing someone who's been in the local for longer so that they don't feel like they don't know what they're doing or just stop coming to meetings. And with our eviction defense network too, we are like scared of what happens if we don't win, and trying to think of the worst case scenario, like are we going to have a backup fund to get tenants into hotels or like storage and stuff like that. So we're starting to think of those concrete things of what to do. And last thought, yeah, like incorporating political education, like what was said, like that plot twist at the end, you come to know your rights, but we're also going to talk about like the history of housing and why it's set up against you, and that, yeah, like showing the political situation and that you do have power. And I think that's important for the long-term sustainability of keeping people in with the union.
That's great, thank you. Those are very well-formed thoughts, I would say. Does anyone who hasn't spoken much yet want to chime in with either kind of questions that or quandaries that you've kind of run into in some of this stuff, or thoughts about what we've been chatting about?
Yeah, I mean, I was just curious from like a logistical standpoint, because I'm really liking people's ideas and thoughts about how to kind of keep membership and like keep people active in the union. And I'm just curious about any kind of like more logistical advice on how to do that effectively. Like maybe just like assigning like a new member to a more experienced member, or like what has worked for people.
That's a great question. Gail, I see you're on Stack, and if other people want to, also just to clarify for folks, if you're on the computer, we've been just typing the word Stack into the chat box to get on the Stack. That's what we mean when we say get on Stack. If other folks want to get on Stack to chat about that, go for it. But yeah, Gail.
Oh, I had a question, so I don't have an answer. I'm really sorry. Yeah, but I guess I'll ask my question, and then hopefully people can answer both of our questions maybe simultaneously. So I guess one of the issues or challenges that we're having right now is that we're trying to get the landlord to negotiate with the tenants, but the landlord is just ignoring and like basically trying to pressure tenants individually to leave. And so we decided to bring in a lawyer to like be our official representative, so that we were hoping that this would help get the landlord to the table. I mean, we're still continuing all of the like media pressure and everything. But yeah, I was wondering if anyone had any experience like with that. Like, is it gonna help to bring a lawyer and an official rep to like do negotiations, or no? Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good question, and definitely you're not the only folks, unfortunately, to have landlords kind of like just single tenants out and pick them off one by one. Also, one thing thinking about, I don't have a good answer to whether a lawyer would help. My impression is that it depends. One thing thinking about, yeah, like what are actions to keep people engaged and stuff. The idea of having members shadow one another is fascinating to me. One thing I think we've been experimenting with more in Stu is trying to drive like a lot of turnout to seemingly pretty low stakes things. Like if there's like a tenant or a group of tenants that are delivering a letter to their landlord, like a demand letter asking for a modest thing like repairs or something, to be like, to try and just drum up as many people from the union as possible to go do the delivery with them, right? Like that's an easy thing, especially if it's just delivering a letter, you know, like you're not going to get arrested doing that or whatever. But it's, I think I'm kind of exploring the idea that that's a great way to kind of like build people's engagement. So, and we've been trying the kind of what Heike was saying with Glendale Tenants Union too. We haven't been doing neighborhood walks quite so much, but we've been like posting up, or one time at least, we posted up in like a grocery store parking lot and kind of walked around with a bullhorn and talked to people, which actually like generated quite a bit of interest in what we were up to. So those are some of our experiences. Anthony, I see you're on Stack.
In terms of keeping like tenants within individual buildings engaged as members in particular, and making sure that like unions that form in the context of a given organizing campaign are long lasting beyond the immediate organizing campaign, I really got a lot out of the Stony Brook presentation, where they talked about how one of the biggest things the union did in the building was hold these like barbecues and other community events. The fact that there were tenants who they're essentially trained themselves to just like sort of be the core hubs of these mutual aid networks between tenants. One thing that we've tried to do in some of the buildings that we've organized is to, in kind of the down periods between like, you know, direct actions or especially big conflict points, even during an immediate organizing campaign, try to get tenant unions to talk about just like what are the things that they want to make life in the building better, just like beyond immediate organizing needs, and having like even just like, you know, fun stuff, like maybe some of the tenants want to like set up a, you know, a garden in the patch of grass right next to the building, and the tenant union can take a lead on organizing people to do that together as well, even if that's something non-controversial. And that is like really critical in building the union into something that will last long.
I love that, like raising expectations for housing, not just fighting for like not to lose the bare minimum that we all have. Okay, well, so we have like about 5 more minutes, and we don't have like, we don't have additional thoughts to impart to you all, but I'm just curious if anybody has kind of some like maybe closing reflections or things that our conversation has put up with you for you. And also, I just want to say thanks again to everyone for like coming and sharing your experiences. I feel like a lot of this kind of like peer-to-peer sharing is what we get the most out of. I don't know if y'all feel like that too, but. Maybe if people are feeling shy, let's take like a minute to think about a question that you're going to keep thinking about post 18 convention. And yeah, and then we can kind of like close up by doing a little share back.
Wait, sorry, could you repeat what you just said?
Yeah, so take just a minute to think about like what's a question that you're going to kind of keep thinking about after this wide-ranging discussion or after the 18 convention kind of in general, and we'll close out by sharing that. All right, anyone feeling inspired to start the share back?
I'll just, if I could start real quickly and say that Lou's comment in here is like got me laughing, but it's also kind of real. It says I basically confirmed my bias against working more closely with lawyers. And I'll just go back to what Gail said earlier. It's not, the tenant landlord landscape varies a lot from place to place. Some places there's going to be established relationships you can exploit. Other places, I mean, even here in Sacramento, think of like lefty California. There must be a million tenant attorneys trying to take down these capitalists. But no, there's like almost zero. So we've had to work really hard to establish relationships, to test these relationships, and to find the people that we can trust. So it's not to say like never, ever, ever reach out to an attorney, but know who you're dealing with. And like I said before, know the rights you're dealing with so that you can accurately recommend when legal services are the way forward. And I'm always learning about that, even today.
That's great. And I see people are also like putting some great reflections in the chat. Anybody else want to share something that they're continuing to ponder or that they're like thinking about?
Kevin, you're on stack. Go ahead.
I know I've talked a lot, but in the interest of just filling in the silence, I'll just say that I'm trying to think less about entreating the A2 network to help us put on tenant rights clinics, and maybe more about collaborating on peer counseling advice. Maybe we should be you know, having more sessions with A-Team members to build up our knowledge, the knowledge of us organizers, about how we can do peer counseling with the tenants that we're organizing, the other tenants we're organizing. I'm a renter too.
Totally. Yeah, Hike.
I put something in the chat, but in addition to sort of like clarifying and centering our power, I think a couple of people mentioned that, you know, and I've experienced all the time with our union, you know, our fellow tenants come in with a clear vision of a group, especially a group that appears friendly, like, you know, lawyers that are fighting for somehow like representing tenants or housing justice organizations, that it, you know, come in with looking up to those organizations. And I think we know that that is not the system that we want to live in. And so we need to find ways to always articulate it within our unions, that there's a power differential there and we need to fight against that.
That's great. Yes, totally. Kristen and or Andrew, go for it.
Yeah, just I guess in terms of the question, like, how are we going to start building relationships with people who know the law more, can give legal advice besides like legal aid, right? And also, right, how do we simultaneously build for success but plan for failure, right? Because of how things are for tenants here, like there's definitely going to be a lot of failure.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, Caroline's question about the panic button has been kind of making me reconsider a lot of those questions too. Okay, well, it's 1:47. If anybody has a final reflection, maybe let's hear it out. But then I think maybe we should vacate the room in case the next people that are using this Zoom like want to get on and start prepping or whatever. Any last thoughts? And feel free to just popcorn and unmute yourself if you want to jump in. Yeah, and I'll just say again, like, thank you all for coming. And yeah, and just contributing like all of your thoughts. That's totally like what makes a session. So
thanks everybody. This was really fun. Great.
Looking
Thank
forward
you,
to
Gail.
keeping the conversation going.
Gail,
Bye,
give us all your numbers so you can be our solidarity attorney. No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah, totally.
One day. But unfortunately, I'm in Canada, so I feel like I'm so useless to everyone here. Yeah, I don't know, maybe. Well, yeah.
Well, thanks all for your perspectives, and we'll see you soon.
All right. Bye, everybody.